And
Wait, sir, I'm lying. I think so, sir. It's working. It's recording in my end.
no, Angelica, I don't follow an alphabetical order for the oral recit. It just was coincidental. Okay?
Pero sir ano, 'di ba po sir natawag na po ako last session, does that mean sir na okey na po ang receipt ko?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. Thank you sir.
Pinagpa-record ka gid ya. Okay. Anyway, let's continue group 1 whenever you're ready. Who's sharing their screen again?
Nisi again, sir. Nisi will be sharing her screen.
Okay, Miss Calzado, you are still co-host. You may start whenever you're ready.
Okay, so for the benefit of those classmates that who are not in this class, we are group 1 once again, and we will be continuing our report on local patrons, bosses, and dynasties. So in my report, I am tasked to discuss and provide one case of local bosses and patrons in the context of local Philippine politics, and I have chosen Cavite. So before I start, alam naman natin na scattered throughout the regions of the Philippines, there are various individuals coming from different powerful clans, no, very feudalistic yung sistema, who have long held unchecked powers for more than decades. And among the many factors which contributes to this consolidation of power can be attributed to the persistent existence of patron-client relationships, which many political anthropologists would argue to be the driving force of monopolization of power in the entire country. And before we get into the case study, I would like first to create a distinction between what a patron and what a boss is. Miles, is patron the same as boss? Well, I want all of you to take note of these three key distinctions, three characteristics for one to become a boss, and which is completely different from what a patron is. So yung boss, guys, he is a person, he is an individual who achieve a certain degree of monopolistic power in which coercion serves as the main pillar of strengthening the hold of power. Meaning, yung individual na to may command siya sa capital accumulation, sa commanding heights of the economy. Secondly, yung boss na to is may direct control siya sa state prerogatives, which means that it enables him or her to create political machines. Thirdly, yung boss na to, guys, is he or she is a secular leader or par excellence, meaning of the same kind, best of its kind, who depends almost entirely on palpable inducements and sanctions, threats to move people. As showcase dito sa case study natin, yung presence nila ng mga goons, may mga goons sila, to do their own bidding. And so now let's go to the case study. We first go to the first provincial boss of Cavite, si Emilio Aguinaldo. Si Emilio Aguinaldo, he actually did not come from a wealthy family, only a well-off family. Yung tatay niya is, I think, a governor something in Cavite back at the time. So, growing up, si Emilio Aguinaldo became a war veteran. At the age of 25 years old, he became the municipal governor captain of Cavite. Yung connections ni Emilio Aguinaldo as a war veteran, and it enabled him to have access to state patronage, which helped him to acquire prime sugar lands, meaning kahit hindi naman ganun kayaman yung pamilya nila when it comes to lands, he is able to accumulate land, he is able to accumulate capital through his networks of connections in the national level. Pero yung decline ng empire ni Aguinaldo was very short-lived because of his opposition to the presidency of Manuel L. Quezon, which gave rise to the second provincial boss of Cavite, si Justiniano Solis Montano. Yung rise naman ni Justiniano Montano, guys, contrary to, nawala si Sir Clyde, guys. Nawala si Sir Clyde or something. Hello? Nawala si Sir Clyde? Do I continue? Okay. Nawala kayo sa screen ko dito. Okay, so yung contrary naman to Emilio Aguinaldo, si Montano, dati pa lang mayaman na talaga sila. They are a wealthy family having a lot of land holdings. So dati pa lang yung pamilya nila may history na of rent seeking, lucrative enterprises and businesses. Yung rule ni Montano is that he controlled foreign valor funds, nag-a-appoint siya ng mga government officials, and establishing a private army to enforce his rule. Ang paggamit ng goons, goons, gold, and guns is very evident sa rule ni Montano. And then, may control din siya sa local law enforcement. Yung Maragondon Massacre of 1959 can actually be attributed to him. I think he was among the first senators to be jailed, but at the same time, simultaneously, ginagawa niya pa rin yung trabaho niya. Yung decline of power naman ni Montano is due to him opposing the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in 1965, which actually, yung pagkapanalo ni Ferdinand Marcos Sr. gave rise naman sa pangatlong at final na boss at final provincial boss ng Cavite, which is si Juanito Puchani Rimulya. Yung ascent ni Rimulya, guys, sa governorship was actually facilitated by Ferdinand Marcos Sr., which he feels indebted to. So may utang na loob siya kay Ferdinand Marcos Sr. So inalaw niya yung pagpasok ng cronies ni Marcos sa Cavite. And this enabled the cronies to run ventures, illegal and legal ones, as many as they want in Cavite. Si Rimulya din, kinoconsider niya yung sarili niya as the godfather of industrial revolution. Bakit? Kasi gumagamit siya ng strong arm tactics, gumagamit siya ng private armies para masettle yung land disputes in all over in Cavite province. Aside from this, pinabypass na yung agrarian reform. Initially, yung mga lupa na dapat sa mga magsasaka, ay ginagamit niya ito for industrial use, which allows him to bypass the agrarian reform. Yung downfall naman ni Rimulya is because he opposed the presidency of Fidel Ramos. And now, all of that being said, ano ba yung nakikita nating trend sa tatlong political bosses na to? Simple lang. Yung first one is they are single generation bosses, meaning that they are not able to transfer their power, they are not able to transfer their wealth to a dynastic fashion. Hindi nila nabibigay yung kapangyarihan nila sa mga anak nila, hindi nila nabibigay yung authority nila sa mga kakilala nila. It's because of heavy opposition, because yung Cavite is characterized as a very feudalistic, gangsterish, and brutish politics, meaning nagpapatayan ng mga tao doon for a hold of power. Over the course of 20th century, these three successive provincial bosses achieved entrenchment in political office and control over the commanding heights of the economy. Kinokontrol nila yung capital, meron silang kinokontrol nila yung, they have access to state resources, meaning patronage, and then these access to resources allow them to create political machines in order to intimidate people and actually influence significantly electoral outcomes. But despite all of their investments in terms of capital, despite of their investments in economic ventures, hindi sila nakakapag-establish ng malakas na economic base simply because they are opposing people who are in much of a powerful position in the national level. Kitang-kita sa pag-oppose ni Emilio Aguinaldo kay Manuel Quezon, kitang-kita sa pag-oppose ni Montano kay Ferdinand Marcos Sr., and kita rin naman sa pag-oppose ni Rimulya kay Fidel Ramos. So, yung tanong, how are these bosses an example of an informal institution? Simple lang. These bosses operate outside of all legal frameworks or legal structures, but at the same time, they are able to exert control over political, economic, and civic spheres. If you are going to contrast what is the difference between CSOs, NGOs, and bossism, well, CSOs, as napag-aralan natin, they are facilitating democratization, while these bosses, they are facilitating autocratization, meaning gusto nila kontrolin lahat. That's what bosses are. And unlike formal institution, bossism relies on capital accumulation, network of patronage, relationship with elites, and coercion to maintain authority. And that is all for me, and I would like to transition to you now to the dynasties of Cebu, which will be presented by Ms. Barbolia.
Not yet, Mr. Marcada. Some questions.
Go, sir.
So obviously, Aguinaldo, Montano, and Rimulya, as seen on the slides, are not related to each other. So therefore, this does not form any dynasty at all.
Yes, sir.
Correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay. Can we say that all the three men are patrons or bosses, or both patrons and bosses? Or who is a patron, who is a boss among the three?
That is a good question, sir. That's a good question, actually. As I mentioned earlier, may distinction between what a patron and what a boss is. Itong tatlo, sir, I think aside from Emilio Aguinaldo, itong dalawa si Justiniano and Solis Montano and si Remulla, they were able to consolidate power through the use of capital accumulation. No? So yung ano nila, yung land holdings nila, plus their networks of connections in the national level actually help them further to become bosses in their own arenas. Kasi considering that Cavite is characterized by a very feudalistic, very brutalist, very warlord system of politics, nagpapatayan talaga doon, like over the course of the 20th century, 28, I think mayors, or if you can correct me, 28 mayors were accused of murder and actually murder talaga. And
So,
so,
saglit. Simplihan mo yung sagot. Si Montaño and si Rimulya, bosses or patrons?
they are bosses, sir, in their own arenas. Yes, sir.
Why?
They're bosses in their own arenas because they were able to monopolize power. They commanded heights of the economy. Secondly, is that they use intimidation. They use political machines to intimidate people. And thirdly, sir, hindi lang status nagdedepend sila eh. It's because of their influence as well.
Okay. What about Aguinaldo?
Well, Aguinaldo, I forgot when nga sir napasa yung local government, something. I think it was something 19, But it was actually I think he is a patron but failed to become a boss.
Um, I'm sure that Aguinaldo comes from a land holding family, right? But I'm not sure if he also did become a boss. But by
I'm not sure
virtue
as well.
that Emilio Aguinaldo also rose into power from the ranks, I assume that while he was not able to establish a dynasty among the Aguinaldo bloodline, it was by virtue that he was able to be promoted as a general and later on as the first president of the Philippines.
Yes, sir.
He also used bossism. So, hindi ko alam pero baka yung tatlong ito are classic examples of patrons first, then turned bosses. But as to the degree of how they turned out to be bosses themselves, they just differ as to the methods
Yes, sir. I think there
among
are new ones as well, sir. Yes, sir.
yun lang. So dapat ang magandang sagot is both of them, among them, rather the three of them, started out as patrons.
Patrons.
Meron talagang land capital, something which I emphasize in the segment of Nisi, right? It should be first land holding or land as a capital, and then they do branch out and venture into politics as bosses. But follow-up question, you said that they were not able to establish dynasties for themselves, but that they progressed as bosses. What do you think stopped them from becoming political dynasts while they are already bosses in their own capacities?
Firstly, sir, as the reading suggests, they were not able to transfer their powers in a dynastic fashion is due to them failing to secure a strong economic base. Kahit sobrang laki na ng investments nila when it comes to land, when it comes to capital accumulation, they fail to always establish an economic base. And I think this is due to because yung politics in Cavite is very gangsterish in style. It's highly violent, meaning it's very feudalistic. They are actually feuding with one another. And if they are to fall in power, sir, yung mga properties nila, it is reduced to nothingness. Talagang kinukuha din talaga ng mga sumusunod na bosses. And I think that is why.
On the other hand, though, the answer is very simple. Maybe sometimes they just didn't have family members who wanted to continue their political power.
Actually, sir,
Yes.
may anak si Montano. But then, due to him opposing Ferdinand Marcos Sr., hindi nanalo yung anak niya as governor in Cavite.
What about Aguinaldo and Remulla?
Si Aguinaldo naman, sir, I think he was sent to exile when he was conspiring against in a
Yeah.
pro-Japanese.
Mm.
So he was sent to
So,
exile and then yung family talaga nila. Ay, ito yung sagot, sir, actually. Sorry. Yung sagot is, si Emilio Aguinaldo, yung followers sa supporters niya, yung mga kamag-anak families niya, minamarginalize niya no Solis Montano. So meaning, dinidiminish ni Montano yung kung anong meron si Aguinaldo
Correct.
para hindi
So
na
there was
mag-run for
correct.
Senate,
That's historically speaking, ha, but
historically
we don't
speaking.
want to be historically nerds here because this is not a history class. But usually when this question is asked, why is the boss not able to establish a dynastical rule? Maybe the first answer is that there was not enough family members to continue the lineage. And if that argument doesn't work, okay, then you go to the second reasoning, maybe because they tried, but they eventually lost in the election. In this case, Selwyn was just saying relatives of Emilio Aguinaldo were actually ostracized, aiming to the fact that he faced a criminal offense, which was against the state too. Okay, so I think Selwyn provided an excellent case study for an example in Cavite of local patrons and bosses. But we again draw a clear line of demarcation because the next part of the report are case studies and examples of dynasties and reformers in themselves. So not anymore patrons, not anymore bosses, but dynasties and reformers. So thank you, Selwyn. Let's go to Yan. Is Yan the next person to report?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Marcaida. So now I'm going to discuss another one from side of Philippine politics in town, district, and province, bosses in Cavite and Cebu, but this time is that of a dynasty and reformer. And of course, to answer the question how it is an example of an informal institution. So here we would like to particularly look at the Osmeña clan of Cebu, whose family is led by Sergio Osmeña Sr., originated from a prominent and wealthy Chinese mestizo family in Cebu City. We encountered in the readings by Seidel that by the end of the American colonial era, the Chinese mestizo landowners like the Osmeñas, merchants and local worthies who had begun to emerge in villages and towns in parts of Philippines in the final decades of the 19th century had evolved into a nationwide oligarchy who are entrenched in municipal halls, provincial capitals, and congressional seats in Manila, and at the same time equally established in positions of control over the circuitries and commanding heights of the economy. Pag Chinese talaga, parang nakikita natin dito na very business-minded sila. Saka sabi kasi ni Seidel na dati nalaman ng mga Chinese science na to na if they will be elected, they will hold power to regulate resources. Kaya these people, malamang sa malamang magagamit talaga nila to in advantage and or to continue their business interests. Anyway, now the Osmeñas here in particular also have uh, the what Seidel calls urban political machine, and this machine wielded the broad discretionary powers over various aspects of municipal governance, including property tax, zoning ordinances, licenses, permits, personal appointments, public work contracts, and law enforcement. So furthermore, the Osmeña clan of Cebu expanded its influence throughout Cebu province from just Cebu City by leveraging discretion over national state patronage to build a network of small town notables. And so over the years, the Osmeñas have shaped Cebuano politics and governance through their policies and development initiatives, leaving a lasting impact on the province's socio-economic landscape. There also have factors such as name recall, as Osmeña Sr. became the fourth president of the Philippines. Secondly, their strong political machinery, as mentioned earlier, the urban political machine. And lastly, a loyal voter base, particularly in Cebu City where they reside, or what you call their bailiwicks, having 500 voters in 1906 to more than four, for more than to more than 500,000 in 1992, as stated by Seidel. These these things have contributed to the Osmeña family's continued electoral success, and it reflects that the three Sergio Osmeñas here have held prominent positions in both national and local politics. So Sergio Osmeña Sr. became vice president, president, congressman, governor of Cebu, and also senator. Next is Junior, Osmeña Jr. Was elected as governor of Cebu, Cebu City Mayor too, and also a senator. And Osmeña III as congressman, senator, mayor of Toledo, Cebu, and tatlo, congressman, senator, mayor, and mayor of Toledo, Cebu. And then, yung mga ano nila, yung mga kapatid din nila, ayan, si John Henry, Emilio Mario, and pinsan niya, si Thomas, also have been elected in Cebu government office. So, therefore, we can clearly see here in this presentation that the Osmeña clan's political dynasty in Cebu is a testament to the enduring influence of political dynasty in the Philippines. Not only many Osmeña clan members held government office, but also they held office for many years. So, paano magiging hindi prominente yung mga pangalan ng Osmeña? Bukod sa suportado sila ng mga kaibigan nila, ng mga kapwa landowners din, mga patrons. Tapos meron din silang own power na nakuha sa pagiging popular ng name nila dahil umabot sa national level yung government service nila, and in multiple terms pa. So, yeah. Anyway, of course, to answer the big how, na how is this dynasty system an example of informal institution? So, because there are a large number of members of the long-entrenched political families, aside from the Osmeñas who led for many years, have won re-election pa. And rather than having politicians of meritocratic qualities or constitutional na na-elect, kasi anti-dynastic in nature yung constitution, so it shows that it really just became a norm for Filipinos to expect that the individuals within the 3 degrees of consanguinity, because voters believe that they share the same qualities with that of their predecessor, and now political dynasty exists as an informal institution. So alongside dynasty having reformers as an informal institution as well, they are the ones who are expected to challenge the existing power dynamics by relying on their personal strengths to support their advocacy. And of course, they are not established through a formal process or enforced by a law like formal institutions, but rather establish themselves as significant influencer in politics. So, because of their advocacy for change, they these groups become informal institutions alongside dynasts. So there you have it. Napili ko yung Osmeña clan because si Sergio Osmeña, he was once a reformer that transitioned into dynast, who has also established a political dynasty spanning for several generations in Philippine politics. So, yun.
Okay. Your choice of example is really excellent, Yan, if I might say, because if you have read the work of Dean Mendoza from Ateneo School of Government, which is entitled uh, Fat and Thin Political Dynasties in the Philippines, 2 years ago, he introduced this new concept that you could further subdivide political dynasties into fat dynasties. Fat dynasties meaning dynasties that are not only ruling within a political bailiwick, but are also able to increase their political dynasty's reach into national level politics. So as you've mentioned, one of the Osmaniases became eventually the president of the Philippines, and that is a national power, national electoral position. So that's a good example of a fat dynasty, yung in terms of vertical degrees of government. They're able to fill all family members occupying from national level up to the local levels. That is a recent example is the Dutertes now, right? When you had a father Duterte that is the president, and then you had a vice president. You also have a mayor and a congressman that are also coming from the same family. And as opposed to just the usual thin political dynasties that you know of in municipalities na thin meaning they are spread thinly across all the timeline. So matagal na silang nandyan since 1980s, post EDSA, the same surname of the families within the third degree of consanguinity, but they never venture out to become governors or to become congressmen or senators themselves. So that's the thin dynasty. Yan, although the concept of dynasties are really quite clear because it's no-brainer for us because our recent political experience is always rigged by political dynasties who would not even admit, right, that they're political dynasties. My question is actually an elephant in the room. Why is it that in the first place, political dynasties are bad? What do you think?
I think, sir, because actually yung rason is ano po talaga, nagro-root po talaga sa pag-ano lang, pag-continue po ng personal interest po nung particular family.
What if the political interest of the family, despite the number of years that they occupied in power, is to promote public welfare? Isn't it better for the public interest to be served by just one ruling family with the same truthful, genuine, and good intentions over the years? What do you think is the answer? Why is it that political dynasty should be a big no-no in political science?
Because that would only be a case kung yun yung family. Pero karamihan po kasi yun ng mga dynasty. Iba po talaga yung agenda or personal lang po talaga yung ano nila, yung kanilang
Kaya nga, but
pakay.
granting that they have, on the other side of the coin, on the flip side, granting that they have good intentions, even if a dynasty has a good intention, what makes it still bad at the end of the day?
Um,
You don't have a
yung
good answer? Give me a good answer.
kasi po yung sa case po ni Osmeña, marami po kasing factors kung bakit siya ah, bakit nag-thrive yung ano nila, yung family nila. Isa na dun yung ano sir, yung mga connection sa mga patrons na not necessarily na pareho sa ano nila, sa parang pareho
Correct.
sa
That's
intentions nila.
that's admitted, and in fact that's not the issue. Ang gusto ko lang i-thresh out in your report is bakit nga ba bawal ang dynasties? Bakit nga ba dapat bakit informal institutions ang dynasties to begin with? Sige, I'll answer the question. It's because if there are family members that are vying, even just vying, ha, the act of filing a certificate of candidacy, knowing that you are coming from the same family member, even if you did not win, would constitute a political dynasty, a violation of a political dynasty provision in the Constitution, for the simple reason that you are affecting the accessibility of public office, which must be public in its character. Remember that elections must be free and fair.
Yes.
So if your only options are two people of the same surname, granting they're related, what is free and what is fair in the manner of election, even if they're genuinely and democratically elected. So in simple sense, in other words, for you to understand and for you not to forget, political dynasties run counter to the idea of accessibility of public elected positions. Okay? Kasi public siya in character, hindi siya private. Bawal siyang gawing private property right. 'Di ba? So kung naging mayor na kayo ng 20 years, ang gwa sina do ginaprotektahan mo, 'di ba, ang pagka-mayor. So if you're always in the defense to protect the mayoral seat, "Uy, tapos na ako, sino na naman di ang madalagan, dapat bata ko," something like that. It is as if you're acting as if you're treating public office as a private property, which you have to defend all the time whenever there is an election. And usually that is the risk that political dynasts actually succumb into because they feel like they cannot operate if they're not the mayor or elected in power. They cannot continue any more public service where they're not in power. Then we have to secure this because that's the only way that we could serve better. Ang pinakamalupit na response sa defense ng political dynasty, so would say, because we just want to continue whatever we did correctly. The answer should be, next time ha, pag may kaharap kayong dynasty, speak truth to powers, matatalino kayong estudyante. Sabihin nyo, bakit? Hindi mo ba magagawang mag-public service at gawang-gawa kahit wala ka na sa posisyon? Because you could, right? Civil society organizations do it even without profit in mind and interest. They could provide services. So it does not follow that you have to be in power to continue the services which you already have started doing, right? It's actually a logical fallacy that dynasts always use. Now, we cannot continue this if we are not in power. And usually, if that is the philosophy behind that defense, it goes back to the elephant in the room. Why do you reason out that way? Because some people treat it as if it's a private property right that they need to defend to. So we always go back when you're asked, kahit sa inuman man yan, bakit nga ba talaga masama ang political dynasties? Because it affects the quality of the public character of the public office. Okay? John Joseph, klaro? Okay, sige. Wala namang bearing yung mga Q&A ko. Gusto ko lang na pag may nakikinig na ibang students, mas naiintindihan nila yung segment ng report niya. Jacob, you've been raising your hand. Do you have something to add?
None so far, sir, since the reporters have already discussed. I was just
Okay.
going to ask when our next meeting.
Uy, nag-dismiss na kami sa class ha. This is a recording for future posting. You may actually eat lunch now if you want to. The next meeting is by April 11. Okay? Copy, Jacob. Sige. I hope that's clear.
Yes.
Let's go to Alisa and then to Christine so that we're able to close this one. So I will just introduce so that there is a fluidity in our discussions. Alisa is actually tasked to discuss about why is it that dynasts are still prevalent in Philippine politics today. Take it away, Miss Obligation.
Hello. So good morning again, sir. Good afternoon na pala kay 12 na. So now the question is, are bossism and dynasticism still prevalent in contemporary Philippine politics? So the answer is yes. Despite the turn of the 21st century, politics in the Philippines continues to be dominated by local bosses and political dynasties. So please take note that this reality is manifested across various levels of the government. So this can be seen in the predatory power exerted by local bosses in exploiting the country's human and natural resources. And then meanwhile, dynasticism or political dynasties is evident in the prevailing and enduring concentration of political power within specific families. So for some modern examples we experience today of political dynasties, again, we take the Garin family in Iloilo, for example. So they hold 4 important positions in the province, one of which is the mayor of Miagao, which shows just how established and enduring these political dynasties can be within a region. Meanwhile, let's now discuss why are bossism and dynasticism still prevalent. So please take note that this longevity can be attributed to the concentration of power over the local economy in the hands of a single boss or dynasty. So what do we mean by this? Often, a long-standing mayor or provincial boss are also the largest landowners in their respective areas. So these extensive land holdings afford them considerable leverage as they directly influence the economy and livelihoods of the people within their jurisdictions. So for example, research showed that land holdings of large sugar plantations in Negros or Occidental directly correlate to the establishment of powerful political dynasties. And besides that, there are other ways that political dynasties use to maintain their power, which include instances of electoral fraud, violence, and coercion. So one example is the Maguindanao massacre, which occurred in 2009, in which 58 people, including journalists and lawyers, were killed in an attack masterminded by members of one political clan against another political clan. Pero to give you a more recent example, back in 2023 is the assassination of Negros Oriental Governor Roel Degamo, which was allegedly orchestrated by Alfonso Teves Jr., who is a member of a powerful political dynasty or the Teves family in Negros Oriental. So two of these instances show the extreme and violent measures taken by some political clans to maintain their power. However, amidst this tradition of bossism and dynasticism, there are still signs of a subtle transformation or what we call a gentle revolution. So what do we mean by this? A gentle revolution is where traditional patron-client relationships are giving way or are replaced by more fair and transparent practices. So this is largely due to factors such as urbanization and technological advancements that have played pivotal roles in pushing for this change. And as a result of this, traditional politicians are forced to adapt or else they risk losing their relevance. Meanwhile, those politicians who embrace transparency, accountability, and inclusive governance are finding support from a new generation of voters who demand more from their elected leaders. So for instance, we have seen in former Vice President Leni Robredo's significant support during her presidential bid due to her campaign's departure from traditional politics and focus more on transparency in governance. So now, some of you might wonder if there have been efforts to address dynasticism, which was discussed earlier by Sir Clyde. So Article 2, Section 26 of the 1987 Constitution provides that the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by the law. So while the state recognizes the negative effects of political dynasties, there is still no enabling law to prohibit its existence in the political arena. Because currently, no lawmaker in the House of Representatives has filed an anti-political dynasty bill in the 19th Congress. Because how can we have an enabling law when over 70% of Congress itself comes from political dynasties? And thus, the absence of this, despite a constitutional mandate, suggests a lack of political will among lawmakers who often prioritize their self-interests over their public interest. And essentially, going back to our previous lessons, they fail their social function to legislate laws that reflect the consensus. And lastly, let's briefly discuss how bossism and dynasticism impact Philippine politics and society today. According to Tusalam and Pe Aguirre, first, political dynasties may prioritize the interests of their own families over those of the broader population, which leads to nepotism and cronyism within the government. So an example of this is both Marcos Sr. and Marcos Jr., who are known for their for appointing friends and family members to high-ranking positions such as department secretaries in the government. And second, political dynasties avoid accountability despite underperforming and delivering their public goods, thanks to entrenched client patron ties and a culture of bossism. And lastly, is the disruption and peace and order due to local bosses often resorting to violence in enforcing the law, as well as political violence between political clans. That is all, sir. Thank you.
Miss Obligation, finals exam question. How do
Yes.
you stop political dynasties?
Which it was discussed earlier, sir, that we do not have an enabling law. There have been bills passed by Senator Miriam Defensor as well as Ping Lacson before in 2019. However, they were not passed because of Congress comprising of almost 70% of political dynasties. So to answer your question is that we need to pass an enabling law to actually prohibit
No,
the existence of political dynasties.
it was
Yes,
you
sir.
who mentioned that
Mm,
70% of the Congress would come from political dynasties themselves.
yes, sir.
So it is almost impossible for us to
Possible. Yes, sir.
expect in our timeline,
Mm.
in our lifetime, that the Congress will actually support an anti-political dynasty law. So the question is,
No.
if this will be your finals exam question, one of your finals exam question, as a political scientist, knowledgeable of separations of power, formal institutions and informal institutions, how do you propose to end dynasties in the Philippines?
Yes. To
How
propose, how would I propose to end
how do you
dynasty?
propose?
Siguro besides
Do
passing
not
bills in
be
Congress.
sure. Do not start with siguro.
Okay.
Be sure.
Okay. Sorry. So besides passing bills in the Congress, we should also educate people and
No, people will not be
no.
educated because they are under the
Ah,
system
okay.
of patron-client
Okay,
relationship.
sir.
They are
No.
forever indebted under the culture of utang na loob. You know this,
Okay.
you're my student. So answer the question well. Propose. What's your
Propose.
proposal?
I think as you mentioned, sir, it's impossible. Siguro.
Hmm. Miss Ochona will defeat you in the finals. She will top us in the exam. Guys, if you want to top the exam, this is how you answer. By way of exception, the Supreme Court should what?
The Supreme Court should make
What
a
is the
decision that political dynasties should be unconstitutional
what is that? Until a case is filed. But
until a
since
case
no
is
case
filed.
is filed, oh, but what if there is no case filed? What can the
Judicial
Constitution?
activism, sir.
Judicial
Judicial activism.
activism and judicial legislation. Okay? So as an exception to the general rule, why the judiciary cannot legislate, okay, in some extreme circumstances, it may fulfill the role of the legislative branch in cases where the legislative branch does not want to perform its function. One of the key developments is just yesterday, a group of three UP Law alumni lawyers went to the Supreme Court, filed a case. This is very interesting. Take note of this case. It has not yet been docketed, but it was in the news already. They filed a case yesterday in the Supreme Court. They said, petition for mandamus for the Supreme Court to enforce the constitutional provisions of Article 1, Section 26 of the 1987 Constitution because nobody wants to enforce it. If you guys were listening to Alisa, she said that Article 2, Section 26 promotes free access to public office and prohibit political dynasty as the law may define it, right? But there is no law that defines what a political dynasty is. Remember also that I said in this class that a petition for mandamus will only operate if it is a ministerial or discretionary duty. Di ba kin-discuss ko na sa inyo? Mandamus means you're compelling the government to do something. You're forcing the government. That's mandamus. You mandate, Latin for mandate, petition for mandamus. So what these three lawyers did yesterday was they want to compel the Supreme Court to enforce this constitutional provision because the Senate does not legislate nor the Congress does not legislate. So once the Supreme Court decides on that petition, whether or not enforcing this constitutional provision is discretionary or ministerial. Pag discretionary, pwede kang mag-decide based on the merits of the case. Pag ministerial, it's your duty to do it. It does not invite you to decide on the strengths and the weaknesses. So if the Constitution says do it, you must do it. That's ministerial, out of function. If the Supreme Court in some days or in some years after our discussion, maybe you guys are not students anymore. You guys are now lawyers in your own distinct fields. And if the Supreme Court says we will issue a continuing mandamus to enforce this constitutional provision, you call that decision as a judicial legislation. Okay? Because in that case, it is now the judicial branch who legislates how the anti-political dynasty provisions of the Constitution will be implemented. Okay? So once this comes out in your exam, do not pretend that people will be informed through educational sessions and they will not vote for political dynas when they're given 10,000 on their face. They will still vote for political dynas. Do not expect the Villars, do not expect whoever there is in the Senate to also legislate and support for this the same way they supported for charter change in the economic provisions of our economy. Do not expect nothing from them. Only count on your own intelligence as political scientists. And the way to answer that exam is by way of judicial legislation as an exception to the judicial function, which is only to adjudicate causes or controversies. Remember, this will come out in your final exam. Let's go to the last reporter. Thank you, Miss Obligacion. Let's now go to Miss San Diego to close the report.
So, good afternoon again, sir. So, our discussion is nearly finished. And if you guys weren't able to jot down notes, this is your time to like create your notes as I wrap up the arguments proposed by John Seidel. So, John Seidel is once again a political scientist that explores local politics in Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines. So, Seidel is also one of the most significant scholars after the fall of the Marcoses. So, his first argument was the patron client relationship wherein the patrons are said to be politicians who provide special treatment, incentives, privilege, and protections to their clients, which happens to be the voters or ordinary Filipino voters in exchange for their loyalty and support system. Hence, in year 1995, Carl Landay said that this patron-client relationship was also illustrated as a hierarchical structure where politicians who provide special, where Filipino voters were linked into various um, level of politicians from local leaders to nationally elected ones, providing them providing incentives for the voters rather. So, but there is also term called clientelism. So, how is clientelism different from patron-client relationship? So, clientelism is more of a political engagement where while patron-client relationship can occur in casual relationships or like can be seen in everyday life where patron holds the power to influence the vote the clients providing them incentives or like informal communication, since everyone can be involved in a patron client relationship. Yeah. And let's move on to the second argument of Seidel. Second argument of Seidel was bossism, where bosses are said to be people with a big influence, like warlords, landlords, and these people are said to achieve monopolistic power and capital to influence in order to control the state resources. So these bosses are known for exercising their authority to maintain their dominance and work on their interests to a greater extent pa. So these personalities usually operate outside the legal framework. So the third argument was the uh, widespread presence of political dynasties. So where certain bloodlines monopolizes power over generations, and these families preserve their rule through maintaining their connections um, and control of resources, while hindering and also hinders the entry of a new political actors. So lastly, Seidel acknowledged that reformers, as these individuals aim to challenge corruptions. These reform-minded people are or individuals promote change and are advocates of accountability and transparency. So these arguments of Seidel highlighted the complex interplay between various actors and dynamics in local politics, and also shaping the socio-political landscape in the Philippines. So I was assigned to compare and contrast the module 1, 3.1 rather, to module 3.2. So in terms of democratization, uh, module 3.1 was written by Holmes. So Holmes believes that promoting citizen participation can contribute to widen the democratic consolidation, while Seidel highlighted bossism and dynasties as hindrance naman sa mga new political actors, which hinders a which hinders to a meaningful democratization. So, secondly, in local governments, Holmes advocates for empowering local governments, authorities to effectively address the diverse needs of the people inside a certain community, while Seidel focuses on the dynamics on how patronage, bossism, and dynasties influence governance and local politics. So lastly, in connection to civil society naman, Module 3.1 discusses how civil society organizations provide services that aim to fulfill the lacking aspects of the government, such as corruption and lack of response to national concerns, while in Module 3.2, Seidel focuses on the potential of civil society in promoting reform, which also delves to the challenges faced by people during the suppression by the authoritarian regimes. So also exploring the interactions of civil society with patronage networks and power structures in the local politics.
Okay,
So
that's a very good comparison, Christine. I was really listening. I will just correct the slide. Yung nasa green sa baba, I think
yes,
what you meant
sir.
is that clientelism and PC are informal institutions, not formal,
Ay,
right?
sorry, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sorry po.
So,
Yes, sir. Sorry po.
for those listening in the recorded session, which will be made available a days after from now, PC, bossism, dynasties, and reformers, as discussed by Christine, are all examples of informal institutions. And if you actually were listening to Miss Santiago, civil society organizations are the winds blowing the sails of democracy in the Philippines, right? While on the other hand, your patrons, bosses, dynasties, and reformers are the sinkers of the same boat that civil society organizations are blowing for democracy to set sail. So naiintindihan nyo ba? I want you to picture out, close your eyes, that Philippine democracy is just like bangka, a sailboat, okay? The one that propels the movement of that democracy are your civil society organizations. Nakasara pa rin ba mga mata nyo? Kasi ihihip ako. Malakas dapat yon, that civil society organizations. Yung nagpapalubog nung the same bangka are your informal institutions in the form of patrons, bosses, dynasties, and reformers. The very reason why that bangka boat cannot move forward, even if civil society organizations are already blowing the wind of the same boat, is because of the sinkers in the form of patrons, bosses, dynasties, and reformers. I want you to imagine that NGOs are always working in contradiction and always against the forces of patrons, bosses, dynasties, with an exception of the reformers. My question only is that, Christine, we know that civil society organizations have been everywhere. In fact, as we've said in the work of Ronald Holmes, there is a 45% almost majority of existence of non-government organizations in the Philippines. My question is, what is it with dynasties and bosses that non-government organizations cannot work against? That's why they are always defeated by patrons, bosses, and dynasties.
Ano sir, money. Money sir. Like resources talaga since CSO like ano sir, like it was mentioned kanina na um non-governmental organizations are lacking of funds,
What if
like
I tell
monetary.
you,
Yeah.
what if I tell you, follow-up question, essay number 2, suppose I will give 100 trillion, the same budget as the Philippine government, to all civil society organizations. Yet, they cannot still defeat patrons, bosses, dynasties, and reformers. What is the explanation?
I think sir the concentrated power behold by the dynasties since they are known for their names.
Using the words of Mr. Marcaida, simplihan lang natin ang sagot. Ang sagot, they are in power.
Yeah.
Remember that even if patrons, bosses, dynasties, and reformers are informal institutions, they are part of the government if they win elections, right? And that's the reason why non-government organizations cannot just easily defeat them. Why the sinkers are always in the boat, because they are part and parcel of the government. And they're very difficult to get rid with, because they are entrenched. That the word that we've been keep on repeating, right? They've been entrenched into our local political systems. And what is the result? Maybe sometimes the boat is sailing by the winds that blows the sails, but maybe sometimes it's just really a stagnant boat at all. May mga circumstances, and also do not be disheartened, because you guys are political scientists in the making, wonderful leaders in the making with an understanding of politics. Do not be disheartened too. If you feel almost like the Philippine democracy is just a stagnant boat, not moving because of the floaters that we have. The most important part is that we understand how to move forward or to propose solutions on how that boat is supposed to set sail again, despite all of these floaters or sinkers. Okay? So I just saw Mr. Markaide raising his hand. Your point, and then I'll proceed to a conclusion, then we could wrap up by 12:45. Selwyn.
I think, sir, now, mas may realization ako. Back when I asked you about when did the EDSA People Power actually deliver social change? Now that we actually delved into the presence or existence of informal institutions, mas naliwanagan ako when it comes to actually like the purpose, aside from the social change that EDSA was actually trying to convey. It was actually for us also to understand how really deeply entrenched political dynamics are both in the local presence and the national presence. That's just it, sir.
To be fair though, no, point taken. There was really a promise of EDSA. 1987 Constitution, as early as 1987, already included an anti-political dynasty provision, right? If you were listening to Miss Obligation's segment of the report. It's just that we have bullshit politicians who know their way around. And that's really saddening for us because it is so frustrating that people who know better are undermined because you have evil politicians who know their way around. I always tell my second year students, and maybe in this class too, the evil works harder at night, and sometimes the evil is way smarter than you. So the only way, guys, really, if you're envisioning a future where Philippine democracy is flourishing, you have a family, yung feeling nyo ang ganda-ganda ng pamamahala sa Pilipinas, start creating that vision now and study well because your knowledge may later on be used to speak truth to power. And what you now are understanding in this class, you could use it later as not maybe my wish is that you do not become politicians, but maybe people who would help the government eventually reform itself. So the promise of EDSA is actually there. It's just that we were not able to fulfill its promise. Not we. I would actually allude it to the politicians themselves. I wrote an article about this, which came out in our law journal. I will send it to the group chat. In that article, I explained the history of the anti-dynasty provisions from the Constitutional Commission's plenary debate, what was the intention really, and all the movements in the Congress, which were blocked by the Congress too. Why it was very difficult. Aliza was correct that we have at least two examples. Pero ang dami ng initiatives, magugulat kayo, almost 20, 40 plus bills authored to just enact the anti-political dynasty provision, all not voted favorably in the Congress. And then towards the end, I proposed judicial legislation. When you read that, you would understand really why political dynasties, bosses, and reformers in local Philippine politics matter as an informal institutions. The key point here, for those who are listening, and we're now closing the discussion, it's already 12:46, is that family matters in Philippine politics. That's just it. And that statement contains, that statement has so much to be unpacked, but we end by the understanding that while non-government organizations are informal institutions, so are families in politics that partake the character of patrons, bosses, dynasties, and reformers also partake a character of informality in the study of politics. And if you've closed your eyes earlier while you were listening, I said that they are the ones that are sinkers in the boat of the Philippine democracy. Okay? I'd like to thank the reporters. I think it was beautifully agreed upon. There was a uniformity in your slides. One slide builds to another. If you guys were just listening, maganda din yung pagkaka-explain. I just think that the problem is with the time limits that we have because I have to ask questions sometimes to emphasize what you wanted to say. But nonetheless, I hope that the reporters take note that we have three more people to target by April 11. So prepare very good questions to them. I will give you the first 10 minutes before we proceed to group 2 for you to conduct your oral recitations. Do you guys follow?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So at this point, I'll just na kanina ha, na-disconnect ako. Kung nakita nyo na wala ako. So Selwyn, I will just, you can stop the recording now and then end from there.